Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Today, Donald Trump was in Poland, very friendly to his ideas, nationalistic, control of the border, control of their people there. But then, of course, CNN's Jim Acosta followed him, the White House correspondent from CNN. And one of the things that he said today, and we're going to talk about Donald Trump's speech, gave a great speech talking about, does the West have the will to survive? And he used Poland as a great example of a country that does have the will to survive. But I want to go first to CNN's Jim Acosta. Absolutely amazing how out of touch this guy is. He went on Thursday morning's edition of New Day, a CNN program, and he questioned the president's claim that it was, quote, 3 or 4 intelligence agencies that determined Russia was attempting to influence the 2016 election, not 17 agencies. Now, remember, this broke over the weekend. Actually, the retractions, I think, came out on Friday or Saturday. I covered this in detail on the Sunday show, July 2nd. If you want to find the article there, even the New York Times retraction on the 17 intelligence agencies is a lie. But it was a retraction. The New York Times and the Associated Press have both pulled out. But apparently, Jim Acosta is clueless. And as I tweeted out today, I said Acosta and CNN continue to push this 17 intelligence agencies lie. It started with Hillary's October debate, and they parroted that just as the James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, did, but it's been debunked. It was denied by Clapper in testimony that he gave to Congress, and it was retracted last week by the New York Times, by the Associated Press. But he is apparently clueless. Acosta said, where does that number come from? Well, it comes from the New York Times and Associated Press. You're very selective, aren't you, Jim? We've had 3,500 stories, as WikiLeaks pointed out, as of May, talking about 17 intelligence agencies that show that there's collusion with the Russians and Trump. Not true at all. It was patently absurd when Hillary Clinton said it, but we had people in the intelligence agencies that chimed in on that. And as we pointed out over the weekend, the New York Times came back and said, no, it was only 4 intelligence agencies. No, actually, as the AP pointed out, it was only 3. That's where Trump got the 3 or 4. And both of those are actually not true as well. If you look at the analysis that WND did, if you go back and you look at the testimony of James Clapper, guess what? It was 0. 0. We had the FBI, the NSA, and the CIA meet with DNI, Director of National Intelligence, Clapper, and they were presented with a CrowdStrike report. And it wasn't these agencies that had investigated it. They were presented with a report. And Clapper said, well, none of them disagreed. It was a hand-picked panel of sycophants who would rubber stamp a report that was given to them by the DNC's contractor, CrowdStrike. And remember, the FBI was never allowed to see these servers. It was CrowdStrike that told us that it was Russians. WikiLeaks, who got the information, the DNC information, said it wasn't a state actor at all. Nobody, no government did this, certainly not the Russians. But he went on, he said, he called Trump's 3 or 4 intelligence agencies claim fake news. He says, if we go to the administration and we ask them this question, I'm not sure we're going to get an answer. And if we do, it'll be off camera. Well, you just got your answer, Jim. And maybe you should read the New York Times or the AP. I think you worship those sources. We don't here, but they have backed off on it. But even their back off claims are not actually true. Trump went on to say, and they're very proud of this, CNN thinks that they got him on this, that the election meddling could be Russia. But actually what he said was, I think it very well could be Russia, but I think it could very well have been other countries. But of course, as I just said, WikiLeaks, Julian Assange said it was not a state actor. And Trump went on to say, I think a lot of people interfere in elections. And of course, the United States Intelligence Agency is one of those groups. And they continued to say, I remember when I was sitting back listening about Iraq. Remember, that was unanimous, the intelligence assessment there. Weapons of mass destruction, how everybody was 100% certain that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. Well, guess what? That led to one big mess. They were wrong, and it led to a mess. Well, actually, it led to a war. Today, however, let's take a look at what Trump said to Poland. And here's the gist of it. He said the West faces an existential challenge to defend our civilization. This is our story on Infowars.com from Breitbart. He said the fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. He said the Polish experience reminds us the defense of the West ultimately rests not only on means, but also on the will of its people to prevail. And Poland provides a great example of this. And in the speech, Donald Trump goes through the history of Poland. Of course, they've been trampled back and forth by Germany, by Russia for centuries. And in the 20th century, they were oppressed and occupied by the Nazis, and they were oppressed and occupied by the Stalinists, by the communists. And of course, when they had the uprising, this is a place where he gave his speech, was at a large memorial to the Warsaw Uprising. It was the largest resistance that any country mounted during World War II after having been occupied by the Nazis. And as they mounted that resistance to the Nazis, the Russians were approaching, and they backed off of the city, and they waited until the two sides basically decimated each other. Then they came in, then they oppressed the Polish people. And so what he's talking about is the will to survive. And he said, your oppressors have tried to break you, but Poland could not be broken. Let's pick up his speech. We're going to leave this live. I've got a couple of comments I want to make as we run this through. But here's Donald Trump in Poland in front of the monument to the Warsaw Uprising.
The Polish martyr, Bishop Michael Kozel, said it well. More horrifying than a defeat of arms is a collapse of the human spirit.
Yes, the collapse of the human spirit.
Through 4 decades of communist rule, Poland and the other captive nations of Europe endured a brutal campaign to demolish freedom, your faith, your laws, your history, your identity, indeed the very essence of your culture and your humanity.
That's what the globalists are doing now.
All, you never lost that spirit.
It's exactly what the globalists are trying to do to the West everywhere now. That's why Poland is such a great example of this.
Your oppressors tried to break you, but Poland could not be broken. 1 million Polish people did not ask for wealth. They did not ask for privilege. Instead, 1 million Poles sang 3 simple words: we want God.
That was the uprising against the communist occupation, and that was centered around Pope John Paul.
In those words, the Polish people recalled the promise of a better future. They found new courage to face down their oppressors, and they found the words to declare that Poland would be Poland once again. You stood in solidarity against oppression, against a lawless secret police
that we have here in America
against a
now.
cruel and wicked system that impoverished your cities and your souls. And you won. Poland prevailed. Poland will always prevail. This continent no longer confronts the specter of communism. But today we're in the West, and we have to say there are dire threats to our security and to our way of life. You see what's happening out there. They are threats. We will confront them. We will win. But they are threats. We are confronted by another oppressive ideology, one that seeks to export terrorism and extremism all around the globe. We are fighting hard against radical Islamic terrorism, and we will prevail.
Over and over again, people chanted Donald Trump.
We cannot accept those who reject our values and who use hatred to justify violence against the innocent. Finally, on both sides of the Atlantic, our citizens are confronted by yet another danger, one firmly within our control. This danger is invisible to some, but familiar to the Poles. The steady creep of government bureaucracy that drains the vitality and wealth of the people. The West became great, not because of paperwork and regulations, but because people were allowed to chase their dreams and pursue their destinies.
That's the enemy within, the deep state, the bureaucracy.
However, are doomed because we will never forget who we are. And if we don't forget who we are, we just can't be beaten. Our own fight for the West does not begin on the battlefield. It begins with our minds, our wills, and our souls. Just as Poland could not be broken, I declare today for the world to hear that the West will never, ever be broken. Our values will prevail, our people will thrive, and our civilization will triumph.
It was a great speech, and now he's going to head to the G20, and he's going to see the other side. He's going to be confronted with people like Macron, the new French president, who today was saying, as this was happening, as Donald Trump was celebrating the idea that people demand to be free, that they had the will to be free in Poland, even after every kind of oppression, they came back, they had the will to survive, and they came back and preserved their identity, preserved their self-determination. We have Macron saying, I will govern like a Roman god. Absolutely amazing, the arrogance of this Rothschild bankster. This guy went to the Palace of Versailles. I remember this was the place that Louis XIV, the Sun King, moved his palace to this elaborate palace that he built at Versailles, and the monarchy was there until they were overthrown in the French Revolution. Louis XIV called himself the Sun King. Today, he summoned 900 politicians, Macron did, from both houses of the French Parliament to a rare congress that he held there at the Palace of Versailles. Very symbolic of that. And he threatened to overrule lawmakers with a referendum if they try to frustrate his reforms. The arrogance of this guy. The monarchy is truly back in spirit, if not in reality yet, but they're going to make that happen if they can, for all intents and purposes, this small global elite. He says, if you try to frustrate the reforms that I wish to impose on the legislature, such assemblies are usually reserved for times of national crisis, writes Breitbart. Reuters reports him as saying he desires to reign as a Jupiterian president. In other words, like Jupiter, like a Roman god, a remote, dignified figure, like the Roman god of gods, who weighs his rare pronouncements very carefully. They said the bizarre statement of intent comes just days after Macron scrapped the president's traditional Bastille Day. You see what he's talking about? He's taking even the French Revolution, which we don't celebrate here because it was based on socialism. It was a forerunner of communism, but nevertheless, it is viewed there as a movement of the popular people. And he's saying, no, I'm going to rule as a king. He's going to rule as the Goldman Sachs or Rothschild banker that was put in place by the globalist elite. Palace officials claim that the 39-year-old's thoughts were too complex for journalists. Yes, you would not understand it, you stupid English types. You would not understand what he is thinking. And, of course, perhaps some of this is trying to recoup his masculinity, I don't know, or his, trying to look like he's a macho. He was criticized by Marine Le Pen, who said, regardless of the outcome of the election, France will be led by a woman, either by me or by Mrs. Merkel. In other words, he's also been called Merkel's French poodle. But as Donald Trump is headed to the G20, remember the last time that they met as a group, and we remember the fact that it was Macron who snubbed Donald Trump and then went on to try to arm wrestle him in a handshake. But what is happening in Hamburg, where they're going to have the G20? We have these leftist zombies actually owning what they are. The day before, actually yesterday, on Wednesday, today we've had riots, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But yesterday, we had 1,000 actors dressing up like zombies, and you can see the pictures of them roaming the streets there. It was a performance piece. They had 1,000 actors in the city of Hamburg. They shuffled and clawed their way down the streets in eerie silence before a single demonstrator shed his zombie facade to reveal colorful clothes underneath. But they said, our campaign is a further symbol of the fact that many people do not want to put up with the destructive impact of capitalism any longer. What will save us in the end is not our account balance, but someone who will offer their holding hand. There you go. That's the Kumbaya Collective. Absolutely clueless about what's going on, absolutely contemptuous of freedom and blindly trusting the government. But after they got finished with their little bit of theater, today, the day before the conference starts, as Donald Trump is arriving, they had violent protests in Hamburg. Violent clashes broke out near the site of the G20 summit Thursday, reports NBC, as German riot police confronted thousands of protesters demonstrating amid the arrival of President Donald Trump. dubbing their protest Welcome to Hell. Upwards of 10,000 people belonging to an army of anti-Trump, anti-capitalist groups, many of them wearing masks, attacked the authorities, set things on fire, hurled rocks at officers and buildings, chanted slogans, touted angry banners as part of their effort to disrupt the global conference. German riot police, in turn, attempted to disperse the protesters with tear gas, smoke bombs, water cannons. At least 15 Hamburg police officers were injured after unruly crowds chucked stones and bottles at them. 3 officers were hospitalized. Even emergency personnel were attacked. These are the communist zombies. They don't know what the real threat is. They don't know who the real enemy is. And if we want to know who the real enemy is, we're going to pick this up when we come back. But it's the immigrants that they will not blame. Cultural enrichment in one of the cities, the German city with the most immigrants, also has the most crime. That's in Frankfurt. So today, Donald Trump was in Poland. People who share our ideas of self-determination, people who have been oppressed, severely oppressed, and they don't want to see that happen again. Yet the rest of Europe is kind of in a trance. They're kind of suicidal, self-loathing, nihilistic, zombies, as we saw these people actually dressing up as zombies. And then we saw the violence come out yesterday. That's Hamburg, where Donald Trump is headed tomorrow for the G20. And as we look at what's happening to the rest of Europe, the places, there's the zombies marching down the street. As we look at what's happening to the rest of Europe, of course, it's in Frankfurt that we see the German city with the most immigrants also has the most crime. And as the article from SHTF Plan points out, the authorities have been very careful to try to cover up the origins of any crime. So, for instance, as they point out, Swedish police no longer are allowed to describe the ethnic backgrounds of criminals they catch. Most notably, the German government and the press were desperate to cover up hundreds of sexual assaults that occurred in Cologne 2015, remember, around New Year's Eve? However, there's certain stats that they can't cover up. They point out that the government can't conceal the connection between crimes and specific ethnic groups. So while they can do that, they can't cover up the crimes by location. So if we look at the fact that the place that is now more than half of Frankfurt is immigrants, we see that they have an incident of crime that is far higher than it is in any of the other cities. The 2013 national crime figures that were leaked to a German newspaper earlier this week showed that the number of crimes per 100,000 inhabitants, Frankfurt ranked as the most dangerous city in Germany with a little over 16,000 crimes per 100,000 people. And so we see the fruit of that. Meanwhile, as the Swedes try to cover up the rape epidemic that they have going on there from migrants, and people understand that. Some police have talked about that. They've been slapped down. We see a Swedish music festival on Tuesday canceled the festival because they said there's been too many rapes and sexual assaults. So that was on Tuesday. They said a Swedish festival, the largest one in Sweden, the biggest musical festival there, has been canceled for 2018 following reports of 4 rapes and 23 sexual assaults that took place on the site. However, today they came up with a solution. Don't pay attention to who it is that's doing this or try to control it. Instead, what they're going to do is they're going to ban men. Because, see, it's not politically correct to talk about immigrants committing crimes. It's not politically correct to talk about Muslims doing it. But you can blame men. Men can always be blamed. And it's never a problem to blame all men for the crimes of a few. No, that's perfectly fine. You can't blame any other group for the crimes, the entire group for the crimes of a few people, but they can do it with men. Sweden's biggest musical festival now will be replaced with a women's-only alternative event after reports of these rapes and sexual assaults. They say in 2016 there were 5 rapes and 12 sexual assaults alone. But, of course, now they're going to do it without men. And as they pointed out, what do you think about putting together a really cool festival where only non-men are welcome, that will run until all men have learned how to behave themselves? See, that's the problem. All of you men are rapists, according to them. All of you, categorically. Sweden's first man-free rock festival will see the light next summer.
I want to tell you about some of the products at InfowarsStore.com. We are under constant attack. You know it by now from the mainstream media. They're trying to attackers on every level. Now with the YouTube scandal, they're demonetizing our channels, which again takes a huge chunk out of our income, which is why we always appreciate and rely on you getting the products, because that's how we stay afloat. They can't get to us that way. They can't pressure you to not buy the products. They don't have that power. And that's why you're the key to this entire operation. We have Super Blue fluoride-free toothpaste, bubblegum flavor, just arrived at InfoWarsStore.com. This is by listener request. Bubblegum flavored Super Blue toothpaste now available at InfoWarsStore.com in limited supply. Again, if you're not using fluoride-free toothpaste by now, you're absolutely insane. Harvard studies, it reduces IQ, it causes bone cancer. It's not great, let's just put it that way. And I've been using it for about, what, 15 years now? So you're going to buy it anyway, why not buy it from us? It's in limited supply, but it is available at InfoWarsStore.com with the new bubblegum flavor Super Blue fluoride-free toothpaste, and it supports this network, which is under constant demonization and attack, because we don't take big fat checks from George Soros. We don't get put on extremist list even though they want us to. That's how they're taking away the YouTube money. That's why we need your support more than ever, because we're not funded by giant corporations who are now pulling the plug on YouTube as they move it into a TV thing, a Netflix model, to drown out independent voices. So support us by getting the products at InfoWarsStore.com.